Hello, this is my individual video for our class project Shush. This semester, the class voted to create Jack's VR horror game Shush, where you need to make as much noise as possible. Footage can be seen in the background, which includes footage of the house still in development from Tom M, and footage from Tom O showcasing his minigame. In the first week of development, everyone decided which groups they would be a part of, choosing from minigames, technical art, VR, gameplay oversight, UI UX, or audio. I decided to be part of the gameplay oversight team. We were generally responsible for production of the game, which included management of the team's Discord server, Trello pages, and most importantly everyone's favourite piece of software, GitHub. As each member of the gameplay oversight team had never used GitHub before for a group project, most GitHub-related tasks required more than one person at a time. This means that there was not much done by any of us individually, rather it was all a joint effort in trying to understand how GitHub works. In the first week, I set up the GitHub repository for the game with some help from Matt and Matthias, two other members of the gameplay oversight team. Initially, we made a repository on my GitHub account, but then we discovered organizations, which, according to GitHub docs, are shared accounts where businesses and open source projects can collaborate across many projects at once with sophisticated security and administrative features. In short, we could create a repo on an organization, and by adding people to the organization, they could access the repo too. We added all members of the gameplay oversight team, including our final member Chloe, and Jack, the team captain, as admins on the organization. Everyone else was added with the member role. Inside the repo, we created branches for each team so that each team had somewhere to put their work before it was ready to be merged into the main branch. For the second week of development, we merged all branches into main for the first time. This meant teams could access other teams' most up-to-date work, as some teams required another to complete a task before they could begin one of their own. While other members of the gameplay oversight team created a video tutorial demonstrating to the rest of the group how to access the GitHub repo and then clone it to their own machines, I went around the class to see if anyone was stuck or had any questions, helping those who needed help cloning the repository. In week 3, I found some branches on the repository that were not created by the gameplay oversight team. Upon inspection, we realized that members were given the option to create a new branch when committing, instead of committing to a pre-existing branch, and some people had clicked this option. I talked to the people who had created these branches, explaining that their work needed to be pushed to their own team's branch. I merged each of these branches into the branches they were meant to be in, and deleted them upon successful merge. This week was when issues with GitHub began to show. The projects had been created in the VR branch, and the model for the house was in the technical art branch. In the process of trying to merge these together, some files were incorrectly deleted, which caused GitHub to break. We believe this was due to Git LFS, or large file system, not being installed, which caused issues with storage. At this point in the project, the 4 of us in gameplay oversight were still trying to get to grips with GitHub, so there were some restrictions in the repository that were not set up correctly, which complicated things further. The team leaders had a meeting, and it was decided that the best approach was to create a new repository and attempt to set it up with better permissions and failsafes. Please welcome Shush New to the organization. This is where the open source projects can collaborate across many projects at once. Capabilities of organizations really helped, as we didn't need to invite everyone again for them to have access to the repository. Again, we created branches for each team, with the default branch being main. At the start of week 4, the project was in the VR branch, and the other branches would pull from VR so that everyone could work on the project, instead of creating multiple different Unreal Engine projects which had caused issues previously. Unfortunately, GitHub had other ideas. Matthias discovered that if a member had files waiting to be committed but switched branch view before committing, the files waiting would simply be deleted. After another team meeting, this time including our lecturer Nathan, it was decided that we should create another repo. This was recommended by everyone, including Nathan, as nobody could figure out what had gone wrong, and we couldn't risk losing more assets. So, Shush 3 was born. We just really wanted to make use of the organization's capabilities. In our weekly session, Matt put in a lot of effort researching possible restrictions for members and branches in another attempt to make the repository safe. The next day, I did some research of my own, including restricting who can push to specific branches. This seemed to stop people from pushing to main, but did allow them to create new branches. While this wasn't ideal, it was more important that main was safe. On to week 5. The previous 2 weeks had GitHub breaking and needing a new repository. Well, third time's the charm, right? Sort of. The house model and VR movement was deleted through GitHub somehow, but by some miracle, one member of the team had a backup of the GitHub in a previous state where the house model and VR movement were available. I didn't understand the situation at the time, so I couldn't help much, but other members of the gameplay oversight team were able to take the physical backup and upload it to a OneDrive folder. This became a weekly task given how fragile the repositories seemed to be, and Chloe was responsible for this. For once, in week 6, GitHub behaved as intended, and the gameplay oversight team weren't needed for any huge task, although we merged branches together when needed. As mentioned previously, aside from branch merges, working on GitHub required help from the entire team, so there was rarely an occasion when someone did something specific for GitHub on their own. From week 6 onwards, GitHub was stable and had very few issues, any of which were solved easily. Therefore, we kept an eye on things in general, but we were really only needed when branches needed to be merged together for people to access other people's work on the project, as we set permission for only admins to authorize branch merges. This was the case right the way through the winter holidays, up until the project was due. I was asked to merge the technical art branch into James' whack-a-mole minigame branch every week or two, and this went smoothly. In the group meeting in the penultimate week of development, it was agreed that we would change the UI/UX branch to be the new default branch as opposed to main. This was because the UI/UX branch had a version of Shush which had a working version of VR movement. We decided not to merge the UI/UX branch into main, as the UI/UX had a lot of work that no other branch had, so in order to avoid any possibility of a merge going wrong, we changed it to be the new default branch. I was responsible for making these changes on the repository, which went smoothly. I made the changes on github.com, and it did come up with a message explaining what to put into Git Bash in order to update a local clone of the repository. However, after asking people who had the role of member on the organization, their clones seemed to have updated properly. Only admins could see the recently deleted UI/UX branch. Once it was confirmed that the original UI/UX branch had been turned into the new main branch, a new UI/UX branch was created so that the team had a branch to commit their work to. Even though I didn't do any coding myself, I performed some code reviews to help with development by checking asset naming conventions were being followed by Ben and Kieran. At the start of the development cycle, it was agreed that assets would be named following Unreal Engine's recommended asset naming conventions, which follow the format of asset type prefix _ asset name _ descriptor _ optional variant letter or number. Ben followed these conventions well. For example, in his m_video material asset, a material requires an asset type prefix of m_, and a material is for the video on the TV. His mp_tv asset includes the prefix mp_, showcasing a media player, and his media player for the video is aptly named mp_tv_video. Kieran had some blueprints. His blueprint for the calendar showing the score was bp_calendar score, and for the plate, it was bp_plate. These are named correctly, as blueprints need the prefix bp_. He also had a material ppm_outline material, which was a post-processing material which requires a prefix of ppm_, so it's also correctly named. As both Ben and Kieran followed the naming conventions well, neither of them required specific feedback for improvements, only to continue naming things as they have been already. That sums up everything I did towards the development of Shush. Thank you very much for watching.